A lot of us have spent the past few days, even weeks, looking back over this past year. It's hard to believe, but it's been a year since we experienced what many of us would consider a normal life. A lot of us, I think about my mom, who has really stayed home for an entire year. She was able to order groceries at home, to worship from home, even before she learned how to manage her iPad to order groceries online. I had a cousin that would go and get her the things that she needed. I'm so grateful for that. But I think about how life has been disrupted, that over that matter of days, we just watch things close. Restaurants, gyms, schools, stores, and church buildings. Now, like many of you, I have known times when we closed our building for a service, typically because of severe weather or winter weather, but nothing like we had ever experienced over this past year. When we closed those doors on March 15th of 2020, none of us expected for our building to be closed for 2.5 months. And it was the end of May before we came back together. And still then, there was a second shutdown because of an increase in COVID-19 cases in Ouachita County in our area. And so I think about how life looked so different over that year. Somebody mentioned something the other day about, Johnny, I like the way that you are teaching on Wednesday night. It's so much neater to see you be able to, you just seem more natural, more comfortable. And my answer was, well, there are eyeballs here. There are people here. But when we've gone through this season, and there's a picture of a really good indication that I was simply looking at a camera to be able to present those lessons. For a lot of us, our fellowship was on Zoom. We would meet on Sunday afternoons at 5 o'clock and just talk, just share stories and try to catch up. I think about the toll that this season had on so many of us. And a lot of us have spent time reading this book, Overcoming the Blues. Still have a couple of copies of that book available. And the reason is because there were a lot of us that became discouraged because of separation, in isolation from other people. It was all in an effort to be safe and to stay safe. But it's taken its toll. It's taken its toll on us mentally, it's taken its toll on us physically, and it's taken its toll on us spiritually. And specifically, I'd like for us to address, beginning tonight and in the weeks ahead, of the impact that it has taken on our church. The impact that it's taken on our church. Now, I need to tell you this for our church family. For those of us in a leadership position at the church, we can't thank you enough for your encouragement. The decisions to close down our building for in-person worship was beyond a doubt one of the most difficult decisions any of us have ever made, participated even in that discussion. It was so very difficult. I love the conversations I had with so many of you, of your longing to be back together, but your support of our leadership and your understanding of the decision that was made. I mean, I think about your service. I think about the way that so many of you have stepped in and you just did some things that were above and beyond the call of duty. Those of you that have continued to work in our drive-through pantry. Others of you, you're calling, you're writing cards, you're checking on people, and God bless you for that. Then you have done so much to be a blessing for this church family. And your generosity. Over 2020, when we spent many of those months worshiping virtually, there's a new word that we didn't know, that we didn't use. But even at a time when we were worshiping virtually, our contribution, our budget, just remained extremely strong. In fact, we met budget for 2020. And as we look at 2021, as we're beginning to meet back together, and we're watching those numbers, they're continuing to rise in contribution, and it allows us to make sure that the work of the church continues in this place, because there has been a lot of work that's been taking place in the ministry of the church. It's looked different, and it's going to look different. But I think about that, and I think about your generosity and the way that that has allowed that to happen. So I thank you so much for that. Here's the big question. This is the question that a lot of us have been asking, but it's one that we need to ask as a church family. What will the post-pandemic church look like? Now, that question is being asked in a lot of different areas. What will it look like in the big picture of church in our country? What will it look like locally? But specifically, what will the post-pandemic church look like for our church family at Mall Road Church of Christ? Now, I know a lot of you that are worshiping with us, you worship at neighbor congregations. But you're needing to ask these same questions too. And so our study, even though it's going to be directed for Mall Road, will have direct impact and application for you as well. So I hope that you'll keep this question before you. You're going to have to take notes tonight because I didn't provide this on our announcement sheet. And this question needs to be at the top. What will the post-pandemic church look like? We continue to move, and I know we use this word a lot over the last 12 months, but we talked about this new normal. And I think we're beginning to see that even as there's some shedding of light at the end of the tunnel, and we're beginning to be able to meet back together, understand this, there will be a new normal. In this next season, it will not look like it did 1 year ago. People are different. Now that can be a challenge, but it can also be an opportunity. Can we talk about attendance for a minute? Because I think we need to look at that. And I'm going to give you a very realistic number. This comes from church growth expert Tom Rayner. And his best expert guesstimate, and it's really based on what we're seeing already. Some congregations are ahead of us as far as the amount of time that they have been meeting back together. But there are other congregations that they haven't started meeting back together or are just starting to meet back together. But what he's suggesting is that everything begins to even out, is that there may be a 20% decline in attendance in congregations. Now, that's a big drop. That's a lot of empty spaces in the pews. So where did Rayner come up with this idea? How does he explain that? I'd like to share that with you because I think these are insightful things for us. He says, you know what? There were some people that were already on the way out the door. He gives a reference to people that at one point we watched them and they were here for 4 out of 4 Sundays. Man, every Sunday you could count on them to be here. But even before the pandemic, that 4 Sundays a month had become 3 Sundays a month. Maybe even 2 Sundays a month. Perhaps even 1 Sunday a month. And so what the pandemic has done is it has identified and it has magnified something that was already in motion. And for people whose attendance was already declining, a lot of them have seen this as a time and they're just not going to be coming back. Hang with me. There's a second thing that he suggests, and it's the state of political correctness. There was a time in our history where it was very much expected that people would attend worship on Sundays. If you moved to a new town or a new city, perhaps moved to Camden, and we met you on the street, we'd ask 2 questions. First of all, so where are you working? And so people would talk about that. I'm working at this industry or that business. And the second question that would be asked is, well, where are you going to attend church? Where are you going to worship? those were things that were to be expected. But it's not necessarily expected in society today. Because of that, because the expectations aren't there, there are a lot of people that will just stay home on Sundays. And so that's another reason of why there will be a decline. There's a third reason that Rayner gives, and it's the lack of outreach. Think back over 2020. There was no Bring a Friend Day. There was no Vacation Bible School. There were no outreach activities. And so we recognize that, and so when you think about some people that were leaving, but there was not an opportunity to invite new people in. Now, understand this. There have been opportunities for people to be exposed to the church. But while we are being exposed in video and in virtual worship, we need to have a specific effort where there's an effort made to invite people, to try to bring people in for them to worship with us indoors. And so I hope that that will take place. So here's the big question. Attendance is going to be down at least 20%. That's what Rayner's suggesting. Is he right? Maybe. Maybe he is right, because I think we have to be realistic enough. And it breaks my heart. You don't understand the amount of heartache and concern and prayer that I've put over a lot of our families that we have been watching drift off the radar. But the reality of the matter is, at least at this time, there will be families that do not return. So maybe Rayner's right. Or maybe he's wrong. And I have this feeling that he would enjoy being wrong. As your minister, I would really enjoy him being wrong as far as the application here. Because I think that we can overcome. I think that we can see the difficult days over this past year, but those challenges can be opportunities. And in the same way that we talked about in Acts chapter 7 and chapter 8, when the church faced that early persecution and they were scattered, that, friends, there was a new normal. In Acts chapter 8, there was a new normal. But what did the people do? Those early Christians, they shared the message of Jesus wherever they went. And so, he doesn't have to be right. Attendance doesn't have to decline. You know what? Those families don't have to leave and not come back. We need to be the ones who are paying attention. And when we see those empty pews, I need you to join with me as we make contact with them, as we make those phone calls, as we write those notes. Maybe even stop by if it's appropriate to stop by for a visit. Keep your physical distance if that's important right now, doing that thing, but letting them know, say, man, brother, sister, I just want you to know you're missed. You're missed when you're not with us. Our church family is just not the same. We're not whole. A body of Christ is not whole when you're not here with us. And so from that standpoint, I certainly do hope that he's wrong. We have our work cut out for us. There's no doubt about that. The pandemic, as I'm saying, it showed us things that were already in motion. The idea about the decline in attendance. The decline in attendance in church, in the big picture, the decline in church, you go to any church and you start looking at their records, and any congregation has been experiencing a decline in attendance over a number of decades. That's the general picture. That's what they've been experiencing. What about the outreach idea? Well, the outreach is something that it had already been moving at a slow pace. And so we've seen that. And so what happened is during the pandemic, what was already moving at a slow pace just kind of came to a stop. All right, so Johnny, you painted a really bleak picture. Thanks for that. No, here's what I've done. I need us to have a dose of reality. And I need you as my brother and sister in Christ. I need us as a church family to recognize where we are. This is a critical point in the life of the church. This is one of the greatest challenges that I believe that the church in the big picture has experienced in this generation. And it very well may be one of the biggest challenges that our congregation will experience in this generation. And so the question is going to be, how will we respond to that? And even beyond how we respond to it, you may be asking the question, well, Johnny, what do we need to do? Two answers, two things that we need to keep as our focus. First of all is discipleship, and the second is evangelism. All right, well, Johnny, tell me what you're talking about, okay? What is a disciple? A disciple is a student. A disciple of Jesus is a student, a follower, a learner of Jesus Christ. And so we need to be a people who continue to learn. We need to continue to study our Bibles. But we also need to do this where we're discovering and developing our talents. Some of us are going to need to learn some new things. And it may be something that you've had that talent all your life. It's just been untapped. I think about where we are. I pray that within a few weeks we will be restarting our Sunday morning Bible school program where Sunday school is meeting again. I can already tell you this. There are plans being discussed, plans underway for a new class. I'll tell you more about that in weeks to come. But here's what that's going to need. It's going to need some people to volunteer, to participate in that class, because it's going to be an interesting class for those that will be able to participate in that. But in order for that to happen, there's going to be some holes that have to be filled. We have to set as a priority in this church to make sure that we are taking care of our children and our teenagers. We talk all of this time about having adult Bible study teachers. And you know what? We're going to do that. But I'm going to tell you this, church, we have had a year where our children and our teens have not had organized Bible study. It has happened some, but it's not been a continuity. There's been the missing of that continuous meeting together. And we've got some ground that has to be made up. And it is critical if there is to be a future for the church. And I will tell you this, if there's to be growth in the church, then we have to set an emphasis on our youth and on our families. We've always made sure that there was an adult Bible teacher for the auditorium. That part's not changed. I watched this. I watched another congregation that were making plans to start Bible study. In fact, it's starting right in these next few weeks, right during this time period. And they have already set the date. They've already set it in motion. Here's where we're going to start. We are ready to go. Oh, by the way, we don't have children's Bible teachers. Well, then you're not ready to start. If we want to grow, we've got to make sure that we are training our children in the way that they should go. We've got to be making sure that. So I'm going to need a lot of us that are going to have to learn something new. But we've got to refire up this idea about evangelism. Now that scares some of us to death, doesn't it? You know why? Because remember, evangelism had already slowed down to a snail's pace. And there are a lot of us that I'm firmly convinced that have never invited someone to worship with us. I'm convinced that there are some of us that have never invited someone to study the Bible with us. We've never experienced the joy of seeing someone look at us in the eye and say, man, thank you for sharing Jesus with me, and I'd like to be baptized for the forgiveness of my sins. But we're going to have to put some emphasis here. You see, this is going to be a challenge for us. And we know that. So that's where we are. And man, keep this in mind. I love what James Nixon has done over the past few weeks in his study in Ephesians chapter 6. But specifically, one question that stayed with me is he asked this, are we prepared for battle? I'd like to take that question and to put it in our discussion as well. With this in mind, together we stand, and divided we fall. Together we stand, Man, as a united group of Christians, can you imagine what the Lord can do in this place? With the people who are set, not just in our unity and love for each other, but our unity in mission together. Can you see what the Lord can do with us and through us? But I'll tell you this, Satan has loved this last year. Now I think that a lot of the decisions were made were wise decisions. But Satan can take it something, whether it's good or whether it's bad. It doesn't matter. Satan can take something and use it to stir us off course. He's just that good. Don't underestimate him. And this idea of being separated, this idea of being isolated, this has been tough for a lot of people. And Satan wants to use that division to tear us apart. Are we prepared for battle? Man, I certainly hope so. So here, Johnny, what is something that we can leave with tonight? Where do we start? Okay, here's where I'd like to encourage us to start. Is the idea that we need to be a people of courage. I've never taught a class before. Well, we need to help instill courage in you to discover and develop those skills, those talents. Johnny, I've never invited someone to worship with me. Well, we need to try to instill the courage within you to be willing to invite someone to worship with us. The word encourage literally means to fill with courage. And so in Hebrews chapter 3, verse 13, as the Hebrew is writing a group of people that are facing some very difficult times, here's what he has to say. But encourage one another daily, as long as it is called today, so that none of you may be hardened by sin's deceitfulness. We need to encourage one another. And we need to have a good, solid, biblical definition of that. This is beyond just the pat on the back. This is beyond going to, hey, that a boy. No, this is more than that. This is an effort to fill others with courage to live out the Christian life. And so that's our goal. Encourage, man, what we're going to be talking about over the next few weeks. We're talking about filling with courage, but it is going to be Bible-based. We want it to be faith-filled. We want to be a people who are encouraging one another. And so we're going to use this imagery of the body to talk about having the mind of an encourager, the eyes, the ears, the mouth of an encourager, and then the hands of an encourager. How do we instill that courage in other people? And so that's what we want to do. We want to have that type of encouragement. All right, so let's get started with the mind. A lot of us have been asking a lot of questions over the last year. Man, I think about this. I've got this list of questions that people started asking. Why is everything closing? Who's going to take care of the children while I'm working and they're not going back to school? Man, what about my job? Am I even going to have my job? Is my boss about to lay me off? Are we going to get shut down and there's not going to be any pay for that? These are questions that have been asked. And how is the pandemic going to impact the economy as a whole? When it comes to this virus, man, why is it that, some people are getting sick on a ventilator and dying? And man, others just look like they've got a common cold. How do you explain that? Is it safe to get out? Is it safe to get out and to go eat at a restaurant? Is it safe to get out and go to the grocery store to pick up groceries? I need to go to the drugstore and pick up my medicine. Is it safe to do that? These are questions that we've been asking. What about this vaccine? Is it safe? Are you getting it? Is it going to work? Now, I'm not saying that I asked all of those questions over the past year. Not saying that I dwelled on all of those questions over the past year, but I will tell you this, that I think of the audience that tonight is watching this lesson. And I'm pretty sure that between those questions that some of us have asked all of those questions. All of those questions have been asked by some of us. And so there have been a lot of questions. Boy, there are things that are filling our minds. And so I look at the questions that we've been asking. Boy, by the way, you throw some political tension and you throw an election in there. And I'm going to tell you, one of the things that happened, and there are studies that are already out. This is actual scientific data to prove this to be the case, is that part of our isolation, our separation, this part about being alone, it's made us an angry people. We are short-tempered with one another. That's why we see on social media people picking fights with people on social media that they don't even know. So if we in the church are going to have the mind of an encourager, if it is going to be our goal if we want to help fill others with courage, we want to encourage others, then how are we going to do that? All right. I'm going to ask you a question that I'm smart enough not to ask this question in person. But we're online, and you may not have a lot of people in your room, and so we can do this, all right? How many of you have gained weight over the pandemic? How many of us have gained weight over the pandemic? I did. I remember going to the doctor, and they make you step on the scales, and I'm like, do I really have to do that? Yes, you really have to do that. So I step up on there, and when the nurse looks at you and says, well, you put on a little weight, hadn't you? Yeah, thanks, because I didn't know that. Then I go into the doctor's office. Doctor comes in with the chart, looks at that, and goes, hey, you've put on a little weight, hadn't you? And now, why is that? I don't know what your experience was, but this was my experience. Is I nervous eat. When you have time and you just sit down and you start thinking about some things, apparently one of the things that helps me process a thought is to put food in my mouth. But we're recognizing now, again, as we come out of this pandemic, we're talking about even more of the importance of being healthy. The importance of being a people of exercise, but specifically, I'm thinking in terms tonight of making sure that we put the right food in our body. Now let's turn in our Bibles to Mark chapter 7. I want us just to take a moment to look at that. Zig Ziglar, by the way, would put it this way. We got to get rid of some stinking thinking. Mark chapter 7. I want to begin reading in verse 18. Appreciate Mitchell reading that for us tonight. Are you so dull, he asked. Don't you see that nothing that enters a person from the outside can defile them? For it does not go into their heart, but into their stomach, and then out of the body. In saying this, Jesus declared all foods clean. He went on, what comes out of a person is what defiles them. For it is from within, out of a person's heart, that evil thoughts come, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, envy, slander, arrogance, and folly. All these evils come from inside and defile a person. And so what Jesus is saying, there's a great Bible study there because religious leaders were concerned about what you eat, that you do so with clean hands, ceremonially clean hands. But what Jesus takes opportunity with the disciples to make clear, that if we want to live spiritually good lives, then we've got to make sure that what comes out of us is going to be pure. Because he says it's out of our heart, it's out of our mind, it's how we think. Whatever we think, Those are the things that are going to come out. And so you think about all of these attitudes and all of the way that the anger and the malice and those type things and of how they manifest themselves and the way they act. He said it comes from the inside. And so we've got some house cleaning to do. If we're going to have the mind of an encourager, we want to make sure that we have cleaned our minds. We've purified our hearts. And so that we're thinking the things of Christ. And we are following the path that God has laid out for us. We are seeking His will in our lives. We've got to have a clear mind that, what's that phrase? Sound judgment and sober spirit that we've looked at from 1 Peter chapter 4. We've got to make sure that we're doing that. I think physically, now more than ever, I'm trying to be careful, be aware of what I'm putting into my body. I can tell you this, spiritually, we need to be aware of what we're putting in our minds. Whether it's music, whether it's time on social media, whether it's television, whether it's just conversations around us. Some of us, the best thing that some of us have done is to turn off our computer and to slide it away. Because what we're finding is that in this toxic society today is that by just letting all of that stuff just continue to seep in, you know what it's doing? It's discouraging us, it's getting us down, and it's making us an angry people. There's not a lot of good that's coming from that right now. But if we are going to be an encourager in the church, we've got to make sure that the things that are coming out of our heart, that are coming out of our mind and out of our mouth, that they are things that will build others up. That is going to be a crucial point for us. All right, so here's the battleground. The battleground, remember, because we've asked this question, James asked it for several weeks, are we prepared for battle? Well, the battlefield is going to be right now for tonight. Our topic is in our mind. Are we prepared for this battle? Are we prepared to control our thoughts, our words, our actions, and our lives? Because the things we think about, we'll say. Things we say, we do. And the things we do determines our overall habit and our overall lifestyle. We want to be a people who have the mind of an encourager. Church, we have our work cut out for us. And so I'm asking you to join me as we make sure that we are preparing ourselves to do the work of the Lord in this place. The challenge is great. The opportunity is great. And I believe that we can respond to that. Can I just leave you this great passage from Proverbs 23, verse 7. For as he thinketh in his heart, so is he. The old King James Version of Proverbs 23, 7. For as he thinketh in his heart, so is he. There is a book that is entitled As a Man Thinketh. It's by a man by the name of James Allen, and he talks about this idea of planting a garden. He talks about the idea of the master gardener. And here's what he suggests. He says, first of all, in order to have an effective garden, you need to decide, first of all, what do you want to grow? If you don't get that part right, nothing else works, right? So you have to decide what is it that you want to grow, because those are the type seeds that you want to plant. And so you're cultivating the ground, you plant those seeds, but then you water, fertilize it, you pull the weeds, and it's only at that point that we can reap a harvest. So here's the question that we need to ask for us. What kind of seeds are we wanting to plant? Because here's what I'm finding, is that there are some congregations, the only thing they wanted to do, the only seeds they wanted to plant were seeds that will get us back to where we were. And I don't think that's where we need to be. I think the pandemic has shown us some serious efforts and areas that need improvement. We have known that there were people that were drifting away, so we need to sow seeds that help make sure that we're reaching out to people to bring them back. We know that over time that our efforts of evangelism had been slowing down to a snail's pace. We need to plant seeds of evangelism. So we're going to talk about discipleship, of learning the things we need to learn, and of evangelism, and of sharing Jesus with other people. Because we believe that what a lot of people are looking at, and they're talking about the doomsday for the church, we believe, and we want to be in prayer about this, and we want to be in practice about this, that we believe that there are great days ahead for this church family.